right, boys, dinner's ready. Smells amazing, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Jed Coltrane had carved his Double C ranch from raw wilderness with calloused hands and a will as unyielding as the granite peaks that shadowed his sprawling cattle pastures. After years of eating his own miserable trail cooking, he finally sent for a mail-order bride, picturing a practical frontier woman who could wrangle a skillet as skillfully as he wrangled a longhorn steer. Eliza stepped off the stagecoach with a tattered recipe book and a faraway look, carrying more jars of mysterious herbs than sensible cookware, and Yet's confidence sank faster than a stone in a creek. On her first morning as his wife, she proudly presented a platter of biscuits that resembled lumps of dark volcanic rock, and even his faithful hound Blue sniffed them once before retreating under the porch. That evening, she served a gluey bean stew with bacon charred past recognition, and Jed chewed in polite agony while silently resigning himself to a future of stomachaches and suppressed hunger. But when a grueling cattle roundup left 18 exhausted and half-starved ranch hands crowding the bunkhouse, Eliza quietly gathered every pot and pan she could find, and the aroma that soon drifted across the yard would rewrite her story entirely. Jed had spent 3 days dreading that his new bride might humiliate him before his crew, yet the scent of simmering beef and wild sage that curled through the evening air made him stop dead in his tracks. The men, who had been grumbling about the sorry state of the cookhouse, suddenly fell silent as Eliza emerged carrying a massive Dutch oven brimming with a rich, mahogany-hued stew that glistened in the lantern light. She had transformed the simplest pantry staples into a feast, with tender sourdough rolls, buttery roasted root vegetables, and a peach cobbler bubbling under a golden crust that crackled when you tapped it with a spoon. Jed watched his roughest cowhands weep actual tears into their tin bowls, and his foreman Gus, a man of famously few words, declared it the finest meal he had eaten in 40 years on the trail. It turned out that Eliza had spent her girlhood in a bustling immigrant kitchen where her grandmother had taught her the secrets of coaxing profound flavor from humble ingredients and patience. She had listened quietly to all of Yet's complaints about her early disasters, never revealing that those failures were merely nerves and a new stove's unpredictable temper rather than any lack of skill. From that night forward, the Double C cookhouse became legendary territory, and neighboring ranchers would invent excuses to ride over at supper time just to taste whatever Eliza had conjured that day. Yet's initial shame curdled into a deep and abiding pride, because the woman he had nearly dismissed as a kitchen calamity was now the glowing heart of his entire operation. Each morning, Eliza rose before the sun to knead dough on a flour-dusted table, humming old songs while the ranch slowly awakened to the promise of another remarkable day of honest labor and shared abundance. The men who worked the cattle grew stronger and more loyal, because a well-fed crew rides harder and complains less, and soon the Double C's reputation for both beef and biscuits spread across the territory. Jed found himself lingering in the kitchen doorway just to watch her move, realizing that the quiet grace he had once mistaken for dreaminess was actually a profound wisdom that nourished far more than bodies. One night, after the last plate was dried and the fire banked, he took her flour-dusted hand and apologized for every doubting thought he had harbored during those first disastrous days of their marriage. Eliza smiled, touched his cheek, and told him that a man who can admit he's wrong is rarer than any perfect biscuit, and that she had loved him all along for his willingness to learn. The bond forged in that humble kitchen grew into something inseparable, a partnership that thrived on mutual respect and the understanding that everyone brings hidden gifts to a new life. She began teaching the younger ranch hands how to prepare simple, hearty meals for themselves, ensuring that no cowboy under her roof would ever face the wilderness with only hardtack and despair. Even the cattle seemed to sense the harmony spreading across the land, because a peaceful ranch flows from a well-nourished crew and a husband who finally understands the treasure he nearly overlooked. Jed and Eliza started a tradition of hosting a monthly supper for the entire valley, where feuds were mended over her famous smoked brisket and the delicate honey cake she made from a closely guarded family recipe. The local doctor once joked that Eliza's cooking had done more for community health than all his tonics combined, because a shared meal could heal grievances that no medicine could touch. Over the years, travelers would stop at the Double C just to taste the legendary fare, and Eliza never turned anyone away, always finding an extra chair and an extra portion for the weary and the lonely. Their modest cookhouse became an unlikely crossroads of the frontier, where cowboys and drifters and even a wandering newspaperman sat together and discovered common ground over her simmering pots. Jed, who had once feared humiliation, now beamed whenever a stranger praised his wife, understanding that her gift had not only saved his ranch, but it also enlarged his very soul. The story of the rancher who thought his bride couldn't cook eventually became a beloved local tale, repeated in bunkhouses and beside campfires as a gentle warning against hasty judgment. Eliza bore 3 children who grew up knowing the language of rising dough and the scent of roasting chilies, inheriting both her recipes and her conviction that food is the first language of love. When a harsh winter stranded several families at the ranch, Eliza orchestrated a week-long feast from store preserves and dry goods, and no one left that cabin hungry or hopeless despite the howling storms outside. Jed often stood at the window watching the snow pile high while the kitchen glowed warm behind him, and he marveled that the one thing he had feared most had become his greatest earthly blessing. Years passed, and the Double C prospered beyond Yet's wildest imaginings. Yet he never forgot the taste of those blackened first biscuits that had taught him humility and the danger of a quick tongue. Eliza's recipe book, swollen with handwritten notes and buttery fingerprints, became a family heirloom more precious than any land deed or cattle brand that the Coltrane name would ever own. She eventually compiled her most cherished dishes into a small hand-bound booklet that the local printer produced, and copies traveled as far as San Francisco and even back east to her aging relatives. Strangers would write to the Coltrane Ranch, asking for the secret of the cobbler crust or the precise blend of spices that made her stew linger in a man's memory like a half-forgotten song. Jed, who had once considered cooking a simple domestic duty, now spoke of his wife's kitchen as if it were a sacred forge where metal souls were tempered into better, kinder things. The cowhands who had witnessed those early burned biscuits would now gather their grandchildren around and recount with laughter the transformation of the boss's shy bride into the queen of the range. Even Old Blue, the dog who had fled the volcanic biscuits, eventually became Eliza's devoted shadow, proving that even a hound's forgiveness can be won by the gentle magic of a woman who really knows how to feed a soul. In their later years, Jed and Eliza would sit on the porch after supper and listen to the contented quiet of a ranch well run, a family well raised, and a love fully realized. She never tired of telling him that the secret ingredient in every dish she made was the unwavering. Jed would always reply that the best meal of his life wasn't that first glorious roundup stew, but the daily bread of her presence, served fresh every morning. The Double C's kitchen remained open to all, and many a young man who later became a great rancher learned his first lessons in decency around Eliza's long wooden table. When a fancy Eastern journalist arrived to profile the miracle cook of the frontier, Eliza simply shrugged and said she only did what any woman with a little patience and a lot of love would do for her own. The article, however, spread their story across the nation, and letters poured in from lonely bachelors begging for advice on how to recognize the hidden gifts in a quiet and unassuming woman. Jed and Eliza's legacy wasn't measured in the number of cattle sold or acres fenced, but in the warm, unshakable truth that a single act of underestimation can become the foundation of an extraordinary life. When Eliza finally passed on, the entire valley gathered at the ranch to share a meal prepared from her own recipes, and the laughter and tears that mingled that day filled the cookhouse to overflowing with gratitude. Jed lived a few years more, spending his evenings in the kitchen she had made holy, and he swore he could still smell her sage and honey in the timber walls long after the stove went cold. Their children continued the traditions she had begun, and the Double C remained a place where no one ever left hungry, either in body or in spirit, because her love had become an unending harvest. Today, the tale of the cowhand who thought his bride couldn't cook still warms hearts, reminding every listener that the people we nearly dismiss often carry the very blessings we desperately need. If this story of hidden gifts and frontier grace has stirred something true inside you, then you know exactly why we labor to bring such forgotten tales back into the warm circle of human memory. Please take a quick moment to click that like button beneath this video, because every single thumbs up tells our dedicated team that you want more stories rooted in redemption and unexpected beauty. Subscribe to Stories Hub Official and ring the notification bell so that every week, without fail, a new chapter of the Old West's quiet heroes arrives to brighten your day and deepen your hope. We read every comment with genuine delight, so drop your thoughts below and tell us about a time when someone surprised you with a gift you hadn't seen coming. And let's build a community that values second glances. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the best things in life often come in packages we are too hasty to truly appreciate at first glance. From all of us who pour our hearts into these productions, may your own table be ever full, your judgments ever gentle, and your home always blessed by the quiet, faithful love that turns simple meals into enduring miracles.